The Warwick Fire Department, one of the busiest in Rhode Island, has been operating shorthanded for a very long time. Down 20 people, the department's overtime bill has spiked, despite assurances from former Mayor Joseph Solomon in early 2020 that a new contract that he pushed for would save the city $600,000 the first year, in part through lower overtime and other changes. Instead, the overtime tab was $5.7 million last year, up $4 million from just 4 years ago, putting the department's overall budget in the red. All but 16 of the department's 176 firefighters made a total of more than $100,000, and the highest wage earner came in at $316,000, 4 times his base pay, including $219,000 in OT. That translates to his averaging 78 hours of overtime on top of his 42-hour standard work week.
We see people having to fill in, often in a mandatory manner, not having a choice. We're doing a lot of ordering right now.
Fire Chief Peter McMichael, a veteran of the Providence Fire Department, came to Warwick to be chief 2 years ago.
In overtime, 19 made over $50,000, 95 made over $25,000, and the average, if you add it all up and divide it by the people on, is $32,000 a year. That's a lot of overtime.
It is. It is a lot. And I think that it's a common story that we see in any agency where your numbers are reduced to the point where we are now.
The former mayor said he didn't want to fill vacancies until a new contract was signed.
Did you have a back and forth with him on that? What was his?
Yeah, that was brought up, that they didn't want to bring anybody else on until we knew what the cost was going to be.
Did you recommend that to him, or what was your stance on that? Would you have preferred to bring in people?
You know, I would have preferred to bring some people on. You know, there's always that fine line of, we'll call it a breaking point, if you will, for when you go down so many members of your department, when you're short, you know, so many people, what is that breaking point? When is it no longer cost effective? And when does it have a negative impact on the department? When does it have a negative impact on your daily operations? So,
are you there yet?
I believe we are there.
That left the chief to juggle schedules and rely on overtime to make sure each of the city's 4 platoons meets minimum manning requirements in the contract. At the same time, the department went to a new schedule of 24-hour shifts, aimed in part at cutting down on sick time. The chief said COVID, which brought with it quarantine and contact tracing protocols, aggravated the overtime situation. The numbers, especially among the top earners, are staggering. The top 5 earned a total of $316,000, $247,000, $202,000, $192,000, and $181,000. The top earner is 53 years old and has been on the department for 20 years.
He earned $219,000 in overtime. His total compensation was $316,000. When the taxpayers look at that, what do you say to them?
So it's certainly understandable where they're going to look at that and scratch their head and say, why is one person being allowed to earn that kind of money? That's the effect of the cause that we're talking about, of being so short-staffed that when we get into the ordering situation and people are refusing overtime, it may get down to that same person through the list each time, and he's gonna, if he says, yes, I want to work, provided that he's not violating any policy. We do have safeguards in place so that people do not, obviously we don't want people working a week straight, and and putting themselves or anybody around them in jeopardy.
McMichael says the union and management agreed to cap at 72 the number of hours someone can work straight before having to take a 24-hour shift off.
At what point does the chief or management say, this may not be a guy we want out on the street? I mean, I don't know how many hours you need to get to that level. I mean, it almost looks like he's living at the station. At what point does it go through your mind as chief, that might be dangerous?
So each individual case is different. And that's when their company officer and their supervisor, their battalion chief, have to keep an eye on the members of the department to make sure that they're fit and able to do the job. Not everybody can do that. There may be people that cannot work that amount of hours and still function properly, and then there are some that are. They're working for it. They're certainly putting the time in for it. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about, our breaking point, where when we start having to order people regularly, not just a holiday where nobody wants to work overtime that day, when you start having to order people to fill a Wednesday afternoon shift and things of that nature, that's when you're at the point that's a place where you don't want to be. And that's where we are right now. And so those negative impacts involve things like increased injury, stress on our firefighters from working extra hours, stresses on their family life because they're not home. In some cases, they may be working, more than twice their regular scheduled hours in that week, and that comes with a cost that can be hard to put a dollar figure on. What kind of stress is that putting on that person?
While the city's new mayor, Frank Picozzi, said he will include new positions in next year's budget that begins in July, an academy won't begin until October, and the recruits won't be on board until sometime next year. So look for hefty overtime bills to continue for at least another 9 to 12 months. The department has already spent 2/3 of its OT budget halfway through the year.
We always refer to it as blood money, because when you're earning that kind of money and you're working those kinds of hours, you're not doing much of anything else. You don't really have a life.
In Warwick, Jim Hummel for the Hummel Report.